Hey folks, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the WNBA and Caitlin Clark. Now, I know this might seem like a strange topic for a political commentary channel, but hear me out. This isn't really a story about basketball so much. It's a story about culture. Every now and then, something happens outside of politics that exposes the exact same cultural dynamics, double standards, and hypocrisies that we spend so much time discussing on this channel. In my opinion, that's exactly what's happening here. What happened in this game specifically that we're going to discuss today has sparked a much broader conversation about favoritism, media narratives, selective outrage, virtue signaling, victimization, and the way certain people are treated depending on who they are, what category they fall into. So, while this may have happened on a basketball court, the conversation surrounding it extends far beyond sports. Now, before we get into that broader conversation, let's first establish the facts. Yesterday, the Phoenix Mercury defeated the Indiana Fever 111-109. On paper, that's just another regular season WNBA game. What made this game significant, however, was that Caitlin Clark left midway through the third quarter with another back injury. Clark has already been dealing with a lingering back issue this season, and with 5 minutes and 15 seconds remaining in the third quarter, she headed back to the locker room and never returned. Earlier in the game, she had already gone through the tunnel before coming back to the bench wearing a wrap around her back. Then, during the second quarter, she appeared to aggravate the injury after being fouled while attempting a three-pointer. She hit the floor hard and was visibly rubbing her back as she got up. Now, again, injuries happen. That's sports. Players get hurt all the time. And if that were the entire story, we really wouldn't be making this video. The reason this game has generated so much attention is because many people believe it exposed something much bigger. See, over the past year, there's been a growing perception that Caitlin Clark has been subjected to an unusual level of physicality whenever she steps onto the court. Whether you agree with that assessment or not, one sequence from this game has only intensified that conversation. See, during the second quarter, Clark drove toward the basket and ended up on the floor as players scrambled for a loose ball. As that happened, Phoenix Mercury forward Alyssa Thomas appeared on video to knee Clark between the legs, shove her fist into Clark's throat, and then attempt to stomp on her while Clark was still on the ground. That's the play that has everybody talking today. And before we discuss the reaction to it and why so many people believe this has become a much bigger issue than just a single hard foul, let's take a look at the sequence for ourselves.
I mean, Caitlin to the ground, and ooh, that's a hand to the neck, and then Alyssa Thomas steps over her.
Now, I think it goes without saying that this is an unbelievably nasty play. The angle we just watched, it doesn't completely show everything that happened, but there's this other angle that makes it much clearer. From this perspective, it appears that Alyssa Thomas drives her knee into Caitlin Clark's groin while simultaneously shoving her fist into Clark's throat, and then appears to attempt to stomp on her at least twice while Clark is lying on the ground trying to protect herself. It's an incredibly ugly sequence, and what's even more unbelievable is that no foul was called on this play. Indiana Fever head coach Stephanie White was clearly frustrated afterwards, calling the no call egregious. She said, "You've got to call it. You're coming in here aware of what happened 2 nights ago, and that still happens. Absolutely unacceptable." And she's right. But following significant backlash over the last 24 hours, the WNBA reviewed the play under its post-game review process, which allows the league to upgrade or reclassify fouls that were either missed or incorrectly assessed during the game. After that review, the league announced that Alyssa Thomas had been assessed a flagrant 2 foul and suspended for 1 game. The league released the following statement on X explaining their decision. They said, upon post-game review, the Phoenix Mercury's Alyssa Thomas has received a flagrant foul 2 penalty and a 1-game suspension for recklessly making contact with her fist at the throat area of Indiana Fever guard Caitlin Clark. The incident for which Thomas was deemed to have committed a non-basketball act occurred with 6 minutes and 52 seconds remaining in the second quarter of the Mercury's 111-109 win over the Fever. Per WNBA rules, The league office has the option following its review of any game to reclassify a flagrant foul or to classify as flagrant any foul not called as such during a game and may impose a fine and or suspension. Thomas will serve that suspension on June 27th when the Mercury visit the Toronto Tempo. Now, I think there are several things about this statement that are genuinely strange. The first is the league's use of the word recklessly. Obviously, we have to ask what exactly they mean by that. Are they saying this was simply careless? Because when you watch the video, it certainly doesn't look careless. It looks intentional. Now, to be fair, I have to leave some room here because I can't say with absolute certainty what was going through Thomas's mind. But in my opinion, this appears to have been an intentional act that she did on Clark. It's also worth pointing out that by rule, a flagrant 2 foul doesn't necessarily require intent. A player can receive a flagrant 2 if the contact is deemed both unnecessary and excessive, regardless of whether there was an intent to injure. But when I watch this play, I don't just see unnecessary and excessive contact. I see what appears to be deliberate conduct. You don't accidentally drive your knee into someone's groin, shove your fist into their throat, and then appear to attempt to stomp on them before simply turning around and running away. There wasn't even any apparent attempt to check on Clark or apologize afterward. This wasn't normal physical basketball. This was just sheer brutality. And then we get the punishment that the WNBA decided on, just a 1-game suspension. Really? That's it? What are we doing here? First, the officials missed the play entirely in real time. Then the league reviews it afterward, acknowledges that it was a non-basketball act, upgrades it to a flagrant 2, and the maximum consequence ends up being 1 game. That sends an incredibly dangerous message. The message that I'm getting is that it's basically open season on Caitlin Clark. If this is the punishment for conduct like this, why would anyone think the level of physicality is going to decrease on this specific player? If anything, the highlight reel of Clark taking unnecessary cheap shots is only going to keep growing. And look, I'm not going to beat around the bush here. There's a reason strikes to the throat are illegal in combat sports like the UFC. The throat is one of the most vulnerable parts of the human body. You strike someone there the wrong way, and the consequences can be catastrophic. In my opinion, Thomas should have been ejected immediately. Beyond that, Thomas should have received a far more significant suspension. Personally, I think she should have been suspended for the remainder of the season. An absolute minimum, the punishment should have reflected the seriousness of what happened on the court. I'm trying to think of comparable examples in men's basketball as far as violence goes. And honestly, even some of the most physical and controversial players in NBA history don't come to mind to doing anything even remotely close. Not even Meta World Peace at the height of his reputation for being overly physical. Not even Dennis Rodman would I expect to do something like this. That's what makes the sequence so unbelievably shocking. So I'm left asking a very simple question. What exactly is the end goal here? Why does the WNBA continue allowing this to get worse and worse? Caitlin Clark is already dealing with injuries. And I would argue that at least part of that is because of the amount of unnecessary punishment she continues to take on the court. As I'm speaking, we're showing a compilation beside me of just some of the hits she's taken since entering the league. And this isn't even close to all of them. She's only been in the WNBA for a short period of time, yet you could probably put together a 10 to 15 minute compilation of nothing but unnecessary cheap shots against her. At some point, this has to stop. Whatever happened to sportsmanship? Now, the Indiana Fever also responded after the league announced its decision. Team president Kelly Krauskopf released a statement saying, player safety should be paramount in our league. We appreciate the WNBA's review of last night's incident and the action taken. Right now, our focus is on Caitlin and our entire team as we prepare for Saturday. Now, personally, I don't know if they're simply trying to be diplomatic here, but if I were in that organization, I'd be pushing much harder for a stronger response. Saying you appreciate the review is one thing, but I don't see how a 1-game suspension adequately addresses what happened on the court. Your franchise player was subjected to unnecessary violence after the play was essentially over, and the league's response amounts to little more than a slap on the wrist. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the video, there are cultural and racial dynamics that have surrounded Caitlin Clark ever since she entered the WNBA. Clark is a straight white player entering a league made up primarily of black women and lesbians, and from the very beginning, she's faced an unusual amount of hostility from some players, commentators, and even some coaches. At various points, people have implied that she's benefiting from white privilege. Others have suggested she's somehow connected to white supremacy, and she's even been criticized over her faith and pressured to apologize for the opportunities she's received. Meanwhile, she's the one getting knocked around night after night on the court. It's a truly bizarre dynamic to watch unfold. And I think the easiest way to illustrate why so many people find this troubling is to simply flip the roles. Imagine for a moment that Thomas were a white player in a predominantly white league doing this to a black player, a black rookie who had entered the league as the biggest star in the sport and was outperforming many of the established veterans. What would the reaction be? The answer is obvious. The story would dominate the national news cycle. CNN, MSNBC, and every other major sports network would be covering it around the clock. There would be endless discussions about race, discrimination, and player safety. Yet when the roles are reversed, the coverage is remarkably muted. You barely hear anyone talking about the amount of abuse Caitlin Clark has endured on the court. And look, at the end of the day, she's just trying to play basketball. This isn't really that serious. This is supposed to be entertainment. Instead, every time she steps onto the court, it seems like she's the sole target. Why? Why is there this level of hostility toward the biggest star your league has produced in years? And why is there absolutely no attempt, no initiative to protect your star player? The individual who's actively selling tickets, selling out stadiums, and improving the horrible perception that people have around the WNBA. The WNBA was a joke for so many years because it couldn't sell seats, and it still can't. It still loses money every year, but now at least you have a player that fans are excited to buy tickets to go see, and you're allowing your star player, your franchise player for your entire league to get demolished unfairly with zero consequences purely, and I'm just going to say this point blank, because of racism. Because if this were the other way around, this sort of behavior would not stand. Anyway, folks, you tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.